The crimson sun of Kepler-7 cast long shadows across the crystalline mines, where humanity's forgotten children labored in chains. Jackson Reed wiped sweat from his brow, his calloused hands steady despite the tremor of exhaustion that ran through his lean frame. For 3 years he had been just another face among the thousands of human slaves mining precious kyber crystals for the Zarn Dominion. The alien overseers floated above the mining pits on their anti-gravity platforms, their serpentine, bodies coiled with casual menace. Their scales shifted from deep purple to angry red when displeased, a warning system every slave learned to read within their first week, or didn't survive to see a second. "Keep moving, flesh worms," hissed Vectar, the chief overseer, his arms gesturing imperiously. "The Emperor's shipyards require twice this output by cycle's end." Jackson's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes down. The Zarn believed humans were barely sentient, useful only for grunt labor in environments too dangerous for their precious robotic workforce. They had no idea that the quiet slave before them had once been Lieutenant Commander Jackson Reed of Earth's Deep Space Engineering Corps. Before Earth fell, before the neural implant in his brain had gone dormant, before everything he'd known turned to ash. A soft touch on his shoulder made him turn. Maya Chen worked beside him, her dark eyes filled with the same carefully concealed intelligence that had first drawn him to her. In the slave quarters, when the Zarn couldn't see, she was brilliant and fierce. Here in the mines, she played the part of a broken woman perfectly. "Shift change soon," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the grinding of mining equipment. Jackson nodded, allowing himself a moment to study her face. Even exhausted and covered in crystal dust, she was beautiful. More importantly, she was alive. And in this hell, that was miracle enough. Their stolen moments together in the darkness of the slave quarters were the only thing keeping his sanity intact. A child's cry echoed across the mining floor. Jackson turned to see young Tommy, Voss, barely 12 years old, struggling with a crystal extractor twice his size. The boy had been separated from his parents during a raid on the outer colonies. Now he was just another work unit in the Dominion's vast machine. "Please," Tommy gasped, his small hands shaking as he tried to lift the heavy tool. "I just need a moment." Vectar's platform swooped down like a predatory bird. "Weakness is not tolerated." The overseer's plasma weapon hummed to life. "No." Jackson started forward, but Maya's hand on his arm stopped him. Moving would mean death for both of them. The energy bolt struck Tommy in the chest. The child crumpled, his young life snuffed out as casually as stepping on an insect. Something inside Jackson's mind went silent. Then, like a dam bursting, it roared back to life. Pain exploded behind his eyes as neural pathways that had been dormant for years suddenly blazed with activity. The quantum processor embedded in his brainstem, a relic of Earth's most classified military program, came online with a sound like digital thunder. Data streams flooded his consciousness. Security protocols, weapon systems. The entire facility's network laid bare before him like a three-dimensional map. For the first time in 3 years, Jackson Reed smiled. The revolution was about to begin. The neural implant's reactivation hit Jackson like lightning coursing through his veins. As he knelt beside Tommy's lifeless body, data cascaded across his vision: security codes, guard rotations, structural weaknesses in the facility's defenses. The Zarn had built their prison assuming their slaves were helpless. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. "Jackson," Maya's voice seemed distant, filtered through the digital symphony now playing in his head. "Your eyes, they're glowing." He blinked, forcing the implant's interface to dim. The last thing he needed was to expose himself before he understood the full extent of his restored capabilities. "I'm fine," he whispered, though his hands trembled with newfound power. That night, in the cramped slave quarters where hundreds of humans huddled on metal shelves that served as beds, Jackson began his work. While others slept, he interfaced wirelessly with the facility's systems. His consciousness slipped through networks like a ghost, invisible to the Zarn's primitive security protocols. First, he adjusted the environmental controls. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make the guards slightly uncomfortable. Then he began mapping every system, every weakness, every potential weapon. "You're different," Maya said, lying beside him on their shared sleeping pad. Her fingers traced the scar at the base of his skull where the implant had been surgically installed years ago. "Since yesterday, you're more." Jackson turned to face her, studying the worry lines around her eyes. In the dim light, she looked even more beautiful than he remembered. "I'm still me, Maya, but I'm also who I used to be." She pressed closer, her body warm against his in the cold dormitory. "Who were you? Really? Someone who can get us out of here." He cupped her face gently. "Someone who can make them pay for what they did to Tommy, to all of us." Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of desperation and hope. In this place of death and suffering, their love was an act of rebellion itself. Over the following weeks, Jackson began his campaign. A conveyor belt would malfunction here. A security camera would develop blind spots there. The Zarn blamed equipment failure, never suspecting sabotage from their primitive slaves. But Jackson's greatest discovery came when he tapped into the facility's communication array. Hidden in the quantum noise between star systems, he found them fragments of encrypted signals, coded messages, the digital whispers of the human resistance. Earth might have fallen, but humanity's spirit lived on in scattered cells across the galaxy. Former soldiers, scientists, engineers, all pretending to be broken while secretly coordinating. The network was vast, patient, and utterly invisible to their alien oppressors. Jackson smiled as he began transmitting his own carefully coded messages, identifying himself with his old military call sign, Ghost 77. The responses came within days. There were others like him, enhanced soldiers presumed dead. They had been waiting, planning, preparing for this moment. His work didn't go entirely unnoticed. Thane Chorus, a young Zarn guard with unusually pale scales, began watching him with curious rather than hostile eyes. Unlike the other guards, Thane seemed to actually see the slaves as individuals rather than work units. "You carry yourself differently than the others," Thane said one day, approaching Jackson during a shift break. The alien's translated voice held a thoughtful tone. Like a predator pretending to be prey. Jackson kept his expression neutral. "I don't know what you mean." "Perhaps not." Thane's forearms folded in what Jackson recognized as the Zarn equivalent of crossed arms. "But I wonder, how long does a predator remain patient before it remembers its nature?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Neither dared voice openly. That night, Maya brought news that changed everything. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. Jackson's world tilted. A child. Their child. In this place of horror, they had somehow created new life. "We're getting out of here," he said, pulling her into his arms. "All of us. I promise you that." As he held her, his implant quietly began uploading a new virus into the facility's network, one that would remain dormant until he chose to activate it. When that time came, the Zarn would learn that their slaves had been far from helpless. The ghost was awake, and he was ready to haunt them. The opportunity Jackson had been waiting for arrived with the monthly inspection tour. High Commander Zethkol, one of the Dominion's most feared military leaders, would be reviewing the facility's productivity reports in the Central Command Center, the most heavily secured area of the complex. "This is insane," Maya whispered as they lay together the night before his infiltration mission. Her pregnancy was beginning to show, a small curve beneath her worn slave tunic that filled Jackson with both fierce protectiveness and desperate hope. "If they catch you." "They won't." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, tasting the salt of unshed tears. "When this is over, our child will be born free." Their lovemaking that night was tender and desperate, two souls clinging to each other in the darkness. Maya's hands traced the muscles of his back as he moved above her, both of them trying to memorize every touch, every whispered endearment, knowing it might be their last. "I love you," she breathed against his ear. "Come back to me." always, he promised. The next morning, Jackson volunteered for the maintenance crew preparing the command center for inspection, a duty usually reserved for the most compliant slaves. His 3 years of perfect obedience had earned him that reputation. As the Zarn officers gathered in the central chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing the Dominion's vast territory, Jackson worked silently in the maintenance tunnels beneath their feet. His implant interfaced with the quantum core that powered the entire facility, uploading the virus he had spent weeks perfecting. Through the security feeds, he watched High Commander Zethkol address the facility's staff. Productivity must increase. By 40%, the massive Zarn declared, his crimson scales rippling with authority. The Emperor's expansion into the Outer Rim requires more resources. Work the humans harder. Their comfort is irrelevant. That was when Jackson activated his masterpiece. Every screen in the command center flickered and died. Emergency lighting bathed the room in hellish red as the virus spread through the Dominion's military network like wildfire, jumping from facility to facility across quantum communication links. Alarms shrieked as blast doors sealed the Zarn officers inside the command center. Jackson's voice echoed through the facility's speakers. His words broadcast simultaneously to every Dominion installation within 100 light years. My name is Jackson Reed, Ghost 77, formerly of the Earth Defense Corps. For 3 years, you have called us slaves. You have tortured us, murdered our children, broken our spirits. Today, you learn the price of underestimating humanity. Across Kepler-7, cell doors opened as his virus overrode security protocols. In the slave quarters, Maya organized the evacuation, leading women and children toward the emergency shuttles while men grabbed improvised weapons. The uprising was not limited to their facility. On mining world after mining world, similar scenes played out as sleeper agents activated their own hidden programs. Former Earth military personnel, scientists and engineers threw off their slave disguises and struck with coordinated precision. Thane Chorus found himself caught between worlds as his fellow guards called for backup. When he saw human children running through the corridors his training demanded he stop them. Instead, he stepped aside. Go, he told Maya as she passed with a group of pregnant women. The shuttle bay is clear. She paused, studying his pale scales with calculating eyes. Why? Because this is wrong, Thane said simply. It has always been wrong. The battle raged for hours. Human slaves, armed with stolen Zarn weapons and guided by Jackson's tactical overlays, transmitted through their communication implants, fought with the desperation of the condemned and the precision of trained soldiers. In the command center, Jackson faced High Commander Zethkol in single combat. The Zarn warrior was larger, stronger, and armed with plasma claws that could slice through steel. But Jackson had spent 3 years studying their weaknesses, and his implant gave him superhuman reflexes. He moved like liquid lightning, striking nerve clusters that paralyzed the alien's limbs one by one. When Zethkol finally fell, Jackson leaned close to his ear. Tell your Emperor, humanity bows to no empire. By dawn, 12 Zarn facilities across the sector had fallen. Thousands of human slaves were free, and the legend of the Ghost spread through rebel networks like an electronic wildfire. As Jackson reunited with Maya in the shuttle bay, holding her close as she wept with relief, neither of them noticed Thane Chorus quietly boarding one of the evacuation ships. The young Zarn had made his choice. The revolution had begun, and there would be no turning back. Emperor Zephus received the news of the slave uprising while dining on crystallized starlight in his obsidian palace. The ancient Zarn ruler's scales shifted from deep gold to furious crimson as holographic reports detailed the coordinated attacks across 12 star systems. Impossible, he hissed, his 6 eyes focusing on the tactical display. Humans are barely sentient. They lack the cognitive capacity for such coordination. My emperor, his military advisor, General Vaxim, lowered his serpentine head in submission. The one they call the Ghost appears to be enhanced. Our scientists believe he possesses some form of quantum neural interface. Then he dies, Zephus declared, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds. Issue the Crimson Decree. Every human in the galaxy is now an enemy combatant. Show no mercy. 3 months later, aboard the stolen Zarn cruiser, Defiance, Maya gripped Jackson's hand as another contraction racked her body. They had converted the ship's medical bay into a makeshift maternity ward, with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former trauma surgeon who had spent 5 years disguised as a simple mining slave, serving as midwife. "The baby's coming," Elena announced, her steady hands guiding new life into a universe at war. Jackson held Maya's gaze, his implant dimmed to avoid frightening her with the digital glow. "You're incredible," he whispered, brushing sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. "The strongest person I've ever known." "Just stay with me," Maya gasped between contractions. "Promise me you won't do anything heroic until after." Her words were cut off by another wave of pain, and moments later, their son entered the world with a cry that seemed to echo through the ship's corridors like a declaration of hope. "He's perfect," Jackson breathed, cradling the tiny bundle while tears streamed down his face. The baby's eyes, Maya's eyes, gazed up at him with an awareness that seemed almost otherworldly. "What should we name him?" Maya asked, exhausted but glowing with maternal pride. "David, after my father." Jackson gently placed their son in Maya's arms. David Chen Reed, the first free human born in this sector. Their moment of joy was shattered by proximity alarms. Through the ship's viewports they could see the massive Zarn battle fleet emerging from hyperspace. Dozens of dreadnoughts surrounding the refugee convoy like predators circling wounded prey. On the bridge, Thane Chorus stood beside the human, tactical officer, his pale scales now bearing the scars of his defection. The Zarn military had branded him a traitor, and there was no going back. 37 ships, he reported grimly. Led by the Emperor's personal flagship, Eternal Dominion. They're not here to capture prisoners. Jackson arrived on the bridge moments later, his implant already interfacing with the ship's systems. The quantum processor in his brain had evolved, during their months of running, growing stronger with each connection, each hack, each impossible victory against overwhelming odds. "Can we outrun them?" Maya asked, still holding baby David. "Not with the civilian transports," Jackson replied, his consciousness already reaching out to touch the enemy fleet's networks. What he found made his blood freeze. "They're going to use plasma bombs, scorched earth. They mean to kill every human in this system." The battle was brief and brutal. The refugee fleet, composed mainly of converted cargo ships and mining vessels, stood no chance against military-grade Zarn warships. One by one, the human ships were picked off by plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes. In the Defiance's engine room, Jackson made his choice. His implant could overload the ship's reactor, creating a quantum cascade that would take out the enemy flagship, but the process would burn out his neural pathways, likely killing him in the process. "There has to be another way," Maya pleaded, baby David sleeping peacefully in her arms despite the chaos around them. "I'm sorry," Jackson whispered, pulling her close for one last kiss. "Take care of our son. Tell him his father loved him." The explosion that consumed the Eternal Dominion was visible from 3 star systems away. When the light faded, both ships were gone, and with them Jackson Reed, the ghost who had broken the chains of an empire. But his sacrifice was not in vain. The destruction of the Emperor's flagship and the dramatic rescue of the remaining human refugees became a rallying cry. Across the galaxy, within days human uprisings erupted on worlds the Dominion had thought pacified for centuries. On the rescue ship that picked up the survivors, Maya held her son close and wept for the man who would never see his child grow up. Around them, other refugees whispered of the ghost who had given his life for their freedom. The legend was growing, and with it, the revolution that would reshape the galaxy. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Kepler 7, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the tyrannical empire that had once crushed humanity beneath its heel. In the gleaming capital city of New Terra, built on the ruins of a former Zarn military stronghold, Maya Chen Reed stood before the assembled representatives of the Free Human Coalition. Today marks the 5th anniversary of the Ghost Protocol activation, she announced to the crowded chamber, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had helped birth a revolution. 5 years since one man's sacrifice sparked the fire that freed our people. At her side, 4-year-old David played quietly with building blocks that reassembled themselves into complex geometric patterns, a sign of the enhanced neural capabilities he had inherited from his father. The boy's unusual abilities were becoming more apparent each day, much to the fascination of the Coalition's scientists. In the diplomatic section, Thane Chorus sat among the reformed Zarn delegation. The pale-scaled alien had become instrumental in negotiating the peace accords, serving as a bridge between two species learning to coexist. Many of his own kind still considered him a traitor, but Thane had found purpose in helping to heal the wounds of war. "Mama," David whispered, tugging at Maya's sleeve. "The man with the sad thoughts is here again." Maya followed her son's gaze to the public gallery, where a figure in a worn maintenance uniform sat alone in the back row. Something about his posture, the way he held his shoulders, made her heart skip a beat. But it couldn't be. She had watched Jackson's ship explode, had mourned him for 5 long years. After the session, she found the stranger waiting in the corridor. When he turned, Maya's breath caught in her throat. The face was older, marked by scars and hardship, but unmistakably familiar. "Hello, Maya," Jackson said softly, his voice hoarse from disuse. She stared at him in shock, unable to speak. David, however, showed no such hesitation. The boy walked up to the stranger and took his hand with complete trust. "You're my daddy," David said matter-of-factly. "I can feel the broken lights in your head." Jackson knelt down to the child's level, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Yes, I am. I'm sorry it took me so long to come home." Maya finally found her voice. "How? I saw the explosion. The entire fleet confirmed your death. I was thrown clear in an escape pod when the reactor overloaded," Jackson explained, his memories clearly fragmented. "The blast. It damaged my implant, scrambled my neural pathways. I've been wandering the outer rim for years, doing odd jobs, not remembering who I was. It wasn't until I heard your speech on the holonet that the pieces started coming back." The reunion was bittersweet. The man who returned was not quite the same person who had left. The quantum implant that had made him the ghost was damaged beyond repair, leaving him with only fragments of his former abilities. But his love for Maya and his wonder at meeting his son were entirely genuine. Over the following weeks, as Jackson slowly reintegrated into their lives, the galaxy continued its transformation. The Zarn Dominion had fractured into smaller republics, many of which were now actively cooperating with human colonies. Trade routes that had once carried slave ships now transported goods and cultural exchanges between species. The peace process wasn't without its challenges. Emperor Zephys, the ancient ruler who had ordered humanity's enslavement, remained defiant from his fortress world in the galactic core. His faction of Zarn loyalists continued to wage guerrilla warfare against the new order. "He'll never accept defeat," Thane explained during a strategy meeting. In his mind, ruling the galaxy is his divine right. The only way this war truly ends is if someone confronts him directly. Maya felt a chill of premonition. "You're suggesting an assassination mission." "I'm suggesting justice," Thane replied. "Your husband's sacrifice freed countless slaves, but until Zephys falls, there can be no lasting peace." To everyone's surprise, it was young David who provided the solution. The boy's inherited abilities had been growing stronger, and he had developed an uncanny talent for interfacing with quantum communication networks, much like his father once had. "I can talk to the angry emperor," David announced during dinner one evening. "In his dreams. Make him understand why fighting is wrong." The idea was audacious. Use David's empathic abilities to reach Emperor Zephys through the quantum field that connected all consciousness. It was dangerous. The psychic backlash could damage the boy's developing mind, but it might be their only chance for true peace. The attempt took place in a specially shielded chamber aboard the Coalition flagship. As David's consciousness reached across the galaxy to touch the mind of the ancient tyrant, The entire crew held their breath. When the boy opened his eyes hours later, he was smiling. "He's very old and very scared," David reported. "But he understands now. The fighting will stop." Within days, Emperor Zephus issued a galaxy-wide surrender, his final decree calling for an end to all hostilities between Zarn and human forces. The ancient ruler died peacefully in his sleep shortly after, finally releasing his grip on an empire that had outlived its purpose. 10 years later, Maya stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station orbiting the former Zarn homeworld, now a neutral meeting ground for the Galactic Council. Jackson was beside her, his hair now silver but his love unchanged. David, now 14 and already showing signs of becoming a gifted diplomat in his own right, was helping Thane mediate a trade dispute between two recently contacted species. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Maya asked, watching. Their son worked with the calm confidence of someone who had never known slavery or oppression. Jackson smiled, his scarred hand finding hers. "I dreamed of freedom, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." The ghost of the mining colonies had become something greater, a symbol of hope that echoed across the stars. And in the laughter of free children playing in gardens, where slave quarters once stood, his legacy lived on. The galaxy was finally at peace, and humanity had found its place among the stars not as slaves, but as equals in the vast community of sentient life.